so when did you first realise there was a link between head injuries and in football?
Well, I think when Jeff was diagnosed with the brain damage, that's when we personally thought that it was straight away.
Yeah.
And then the inquest, where the coroner said, you know, he's the industrial disease.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, his job had killed him.
Okay.
And then, of course, we had 100% proof.
Yeah.
Not last year, the
It's
year
me, Dad
before.
Dad was diagnosed when he was 55, so that was and he died at 59, so he'd be diagnosed in 1998. 98. It was when Matt was born. He couldn't remember my son's name when they were born. And he died in 2002, in January. It was in the November 2002 when the coroner ruled, and bearing in mind this was a landmark ruling at its time, not that it made any difference to the industry, and then we found out that although Dad was diagnosed with having early onset Alzheimer's, we found out in 2014, and how it came about was Dad was a big believer in organ donation, and the brain, his brain was donated for research, and we were contacted by a Mail on Sunday reporter who wanted to come and see us, and he rang me, and I said to Mum, there's this Mail on Sunday reporter coming. I don't know what he's coming for, and he talked about this disease, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which I've only just learned how to say it, which I'd never heard of. I hadn't got a clue what it was, and he explained that it was due to repeated concussions or subconcussive blows to the head. But at the time, the disease, and still is the case, can only be seen post-mortem. And he talked about this, one of these experts who was up at Glasgow University, and this guy called Dr. Willie Stewart was concerned that perhaps a lot of sports people are actually, through no fault of anybody, being misdiagnosed of early onset Alzheimer's or any other type of dementia. So I rang this doctor up and I said, well, do you think Dad had got it? And he said, well, I can't say, because obviously we need to examine the brain. So we rang him up and he said that we gave him authority to examine it. So the brain was transferred, however they do it, up to Glasgow, and obviously re-examined. And then Dr. Stewart rang me, and he was going to come and tell us, like, sit with us and explain everything, because it's very medically, you know, you don't really want it in layman's terms. But when the question was, you know, did Dad have early onset Alzheimer's, I said, or did he have this CTE? And he said, oh, you know, Jeff had CTE, probably one of the worst cases he'd seen. Yeah.
And he goes all around the world. So he's to say that it's one of the worst cases. And he said, didn't he, what stuck in our minds, he said, the idea of not knowing Jeff was 59 when he died. He thought he was examining the brain of a man 89 or in his 90s. It all kicked off from there, Dawn, didn't it?
And I think that's where head injury in football is different to, say, rugby, because you don't head a rugby ball, do you? So you can't really make that comparison. So what we're saying is, right, the coroner back in 2002 stated the repeated, that's the key, it's repeated trauma. If you bring it back to now, and when you talk about concussion in football, they talk about, you know, head-to-head clashes when you're going for a ball, or elbows to the head, or a keeper coming out and have clashes or kicks to the head.
The knees.
What they need to be looking at is it that, or is it could be both, by heading the footballs? And they explained it to me, is it's just physics. It's like people talk about the old heavy ball, and say, and a lot of people thought, well, you know, they don't play with old heavy balls, so this if there is this problem, then it's probably historical, it won't happen anymore. But when you listen to these guys who make it their life's work, in layman's terms, it really is cut and dry, that it's the physics of it. So yes, the old leather balls were heavier, and Dad used to say at times it was like heading a bag of bricks, going against the forehead, and the brain obviously moving inside the shell of the skull, and that blow against the front of the brain going against the skull which is causing, after repeated thing, this breakdown of this tissue, which is causing these tau proteins, which is the tau proteins that they can recognise the CTE in. But today's lightweight balls obviously aren't as heavy, but they travel faster. And if you just look at the physics of it, it's still doing the same thing. You know, the brain is still rocking backwards and forwards in its jelly or its water, whatever it sits in the brain. I think going back to, you know, oh, it's the old leather ball. No, because there's no evidence whatsoever to suggest that the modern day ball is any safer.
It's fast.
But again, and this is where Greg Dyke actually wrote to us and said, this is what we need to look at. Is it a clash of head-to-heads or an elbow to the head? Is it heading balls, or could it be both? And I certainly think in Dad's case it was, well, we think he was heading the balls, without a doubt.
Yeah, so you talk about the modern game then. I mean, in 2000, only last year, German legend Gerd Müller was diagnosed with Alzheimer's linked to his footballing career. What can the powers that be do to stop more players suffering from brain injuries later in life?
I think it comes down to two things. The first is, well, three things. Acknowledging it. That's what they have to do first, acknowledging the disease and what could happen. I think the second thing is proper recognition of concussion. You know, and where I say that, I mean proper qualified people who are getting these, you know, if the guy has a knock to the head during a game, they're brought off, they're properly assessed, and the recovery, I suppose, because it's a brain injury. So I think it's recognising concussion and doing the proper back to playing thing, where they sit out for so many days depending on what the signs and symptoms are, recognising the signs and symptoms, and then I think once you can do that, you'll be able to manage it more. So that's what I think. I think it's a matter of
it's still got to
recognising it, and managing it better.
Yeah.
And whether it comes to, I mean, football can afford it, you know, regular scans to see any change in the brain, I don't know.
And they're going to have to, you know, when you look at the money in the game, at the end of the day, your health is the most vital thing, you know, and it can strike at any age.
Yeah.
I mean, it came at Jeff at 55, it could have come 10 years earlier, could have come 10 years later.
Yeah. So last year you launched the Jeff Astle Foundation in April. Tell us how proud and happy you were that day and what you hope to achieve by launching this foundation.
I think first and foremost it was a lasting legacy for Dad. You know, a sad one. But a lasting legacy for Dad, and for being the first British footballer to be diagnosed with a disease.
And to have it recognised, because I mean, remember, since 2002 it was swept under a carpet. You know, a coroner rules that football killed Jeff, and for all those years football didn't give a damn. You know, what the club did was just unbelievable. You know, to put the old footage of Dad, and when the players came out wearing the 68 kit, and up on the screens it showed you the 68 kit coming out at Wembley at the same time.
I mean, it was incredibly moving and proud day. It was daunting, though, wasn't it?
Very,
because you
very
such
upsetting.
a responsibility with the foundation.
We just say to people, look, just look at what happened to Jeff. We want to protect others, want to protect children. Goes across the board. Want eventually to be out former players, and it could be a former player from your club that we're helping.
All right, and finally then, what would you like to see going forward with the campaign in football?
Well, just for the law that they've brought out, whereas players have to come out, that it's recognised, it's kept to, players come off. And it's that really, because that's the biggest thing, and grassroots children, you know, because the children don't have a doctor standing at the ground with an ambulance at the corner.
But I think the whole thing about concussion as well is, if a concussion's a concussion, why don't they have the same set of rules across the board in every sport? Because they don't, do they? It's different. It's different for different sports. I don't get that either. And I think that would stop a lot of confusion. If you've got a uniform system across all sports, it's just about putting things in place to reduce the risk, I suppose.
All right, you two, Dawn, Larraine, thank you very much for your time, and best of luck with everything going forward.